It's my pleasure to introduce Don Morrison, a serial entrepreneur and a visionary leader who has consistently leveraged technology to improve the customer experience, as well as top and bottom line results in the consumer product space. Don has been involved in the growth and development of several very notable businesses, including leading American Eagle Outfitters as president and CEO, and taking that brand new concept, that new retail concept, from 1 to 165 stores. He also was the executive director of the Sundance Catalog Company, and with Bear Creek Corporation as senior VP of sales and marketing. Since 2012, he served as the chairman of DealFlow for Blue Tree Allied Angels, a Pittsburgh-based angel investment organization, and also serves as the entrepreneur in residence at the University of Pittsburgh Innovation Institute. And just as a side note, I love the title of your presentation, and I am looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much for being here, Don.
Thanks, Rich, for that great introduction. Every startup has to develop skills to pitch their product or service, whether it's to an investor or to a potential customer. We could talk all day about elements of a pitch, but we're limited by time, so we're going to focus on 3 areas: what makes a great pitch, how do you recover from a bad pitch, and how do you determine who to pitch to. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by 2 experts on the subject. Maria McFadden and Scott Ewing. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their organizations. Mara, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Don. It's such a pleasure to be here, and hello to everyone. My name is Mara McFadden. I'm the CEO of Endolumic, a medical device company that has spun out of WVU. We actually participated in this very 3 Steps to Startup program last year, so we're very grateful to everyone involved in this, everyone who's put their time into organizing it, coming together, being panelists. It was invaluable to us, and so we're very happy to come back and participate and give back. I'm a mechanical engineer turned MBA. I've spent most of my career in the medical device industry working for Johnson & Johnson and Endolumic, Johnson & Johnson and Philips Healthcare. Now I'm with Endolumic. And I've been in the startup world for a while, working for a startup called 4Moms and also a local incubator in the Pittsburgh region called LifeX Ventures. So very happy to be here today.
Scott?
Good morning, Mara. Good morning, Don. Pleasure to be here. Scott Ewing. I'm the principal business analyst and co-founder in the Appalachian Investors Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization that organizes accredited investors in communities throughout the region and actually beyond into what are called micro venture funds. So these are funds typically capitalized at around $1 million. They're member managed, but we provide technical support and back office services to them. So we're integrally involved in the due diligence process and the deal decision-making process for our 280 some member investors. And my own background, just very briefly, I spent 20 years as a naval aviator. Then after that, I have been in for about the last 15 years involved in financial services, both on the public side as a registered investment advisor, and more recently in venture capital and angel investing.
Thanks, Scott. So for all the entrepreneurs listening to the webinar today, there are 3 basic types of pitches that you all need to be familiar with. The 2-minute or so elevator pitch. There's also a product pitch to pitch your product or service to potential customers. But what we're going to be focusing on today is talking to investors, and that's a different pitch altogether. That's the investor pitch. So what I'd like to do is just jump right in and talk about what are the elements in a good investor pitch. Mara, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I can certainly highlight how Endolumic brings some of those elements to light, and then I'm sure Scott will give us the background, maybe big picture on how those are applied across the board. But it's often tempting, I think, in a technical field and a technical startup to dive in deeply into the technology. And something that I've learned along the pathway is that's only one small part of the story. Yes, your investors want to see that you have a sustainable competitive advantage that's rooted in strong technology with an IP foundation around it. But it's even more important to tell the bigger picture of why that matters, what the market is, if it's really solving a critical pain point, and how you're going to be able to access that market. And one way that Endalumic has kind of had to really balance our pitch in those elements up and down to address different audiences is that, because we are a medical device, some people have a lot of familiarity with the medical terms and jargon that we're talking about, and other investors have none at all. So one thing that we have to be really mindful is tailoring our pitch up and down for the level of expertise of the investor, because you don't want to waste too much time over-educating people who already know and too little time kind of under-educating people that don't. So that's how Endalumic has kind of tailored things, but I'll let Scott talk us through the high-level elements.
Well, at a very high level, I think every pitch needs to be a story, right? You're an entrepreneur and you are telling your company's story to potential investors. And if you think about every good story you've ever heard, you know that a story contains certain elements, right? Number one, you have to, in the opening of a story, establish vivid characters. People care about characters. You have to introduce some sort of dramatic conflict or tension. It makes us interested to know what's going to come next. And then you need to set a backstory. There has to be something that happened in the past that set this whole process in motion. And people want to know about that. So if I break that down very quickly, what I mean, establish vivid characters, I don't mean you have to be sort of in a clown suit drawing attention to yourself as an entrepreneur when you're up pitching, but you have to realize that you're a human being talking to other human beings, and that your technology slides alone, I think as Mara just said, aren't going to carry your story. You have to make yourself a compelling or interesting person to listen to. And then there has to be a conflict. There has to be some tension, some problem that you are obviously trying to solve. People like to figure out in their own minds how problems get solved. We like puzzles. So if you introduce your backstory and say, years ago, I knew someone who suffered from this terrible disease. Okay, that sets the story in motion. And then the conflict was, researchers have always said this can't be solved, but we've had a breakthrough. Now you've got a conflict, can't be solved, and a breakthrough that sets the story in motion. That kind of thing, and those are just basic elements to storytelling. That kind of thing is critical to put into a pitch. I think a lot of entrepreneurs somehow think pitching is something different than storytelling, and they ignore some of that, but it's to their detriment.
That's a great point. Someone once told me the 3 goals of every successful pitch are to have the listener understand, number 1, to care, number 2, and to act, number 3. Understand, care, and act. Now, understand really means breaking your story, to piggyback on what Scott is saying, into simple, plain language that anyone can understand. Mistake that I see in many pitches, and I see a lot of pitches over the last 10 years, is that people fall in love with their technology, and investors don't invest in technology per se. They invest in the business idea and primarily the team. So, don't lose sight of explaining to investors why your business model will work. Mara, is there anything specific that you do in your company to address the elements of a pitch? Are you currently looking for funding, or I assume you have a funding strategy going forward, which is also an important element for all startups, is to have a kind of a plan of how much they're going to need and when to achieve milestones. Can you kind of walk through the company's approach to that?
Sure. And I would be an irresponsible entrepreneur to not always be looking for opportunities to fundraise. But we recently did close our seed round of financing, which is a huge win for us, and we're very excited about at Endalumic. So now I'm setting the stage and strategy toward our Series A round. We're looking toward after our 510K approval. But I really want to highlight something that Scott said that I think is so important, that at the end of the day, we're humans talking to another human. And that element of storytelling, excitement, connection is so key. And I think sometimes entrepreneurs are afraid to sound excited about their opportunity. And, at this point, I've done so many pitch competitions, I've gotten here a fair amount of pitches. And I think when people are in kind of a professional mode, they tend to get a little bit monotone and a little bit just the facts. And as Scott was saying, if you're not excited about your story and your opportunity, why should anybody else be? So coming and sounding, for Endalumic, we have this really unique opportunity in the market where ORs across operating rooms across the country have just reached the saturation point where almost every major OR already has a laparoscopic tower with a near infrared capable camera. That didn't exist for the last 20 years. It's just recent technology that's become standard in every camera. So now we have this ability to take advantage of this with our product, and that's never been there before. So we've just hit this tipping point, and it's a new opportunity. And if I'm not excited about that, and if I can't drive home to an investor how unique this is, and we have a moment to seize, an opportunity to seize, I'm failing to do my job because I'm not kind of telling that compelling story. So I absolutely focus on that personal connection, weaving in the pain point that we have here. We talked at the top of the hour about how West Virginia has so many strengths, but one of its challenges is the obesity rates, and our product is used to treat obesity. So try to weave that into the story, and then share my excitement about the opportunity. Investors are looking for a return on their investment, a way to make money, but they're also looking for great horses to bet on, an exciting ride. And that's something that I want to offer too, that I'm a partner that's excited to build something great with them.
Great, thank you. One of the terms that you'll hear in the entrepreneurial community is many investors invest in the jockey, not in the horse, because good, successful entrepreneurs will usually figure out a change of course or pivot as needed. Scott, I'm curious about your organization. Do you have a checklist of elements of a good story that you look for? Mara touched on, investors want to see a return on their money invested in a company. One of the elements of the story is, of course, the happy ending. And for investors, that's telling investors how they're going to get their money back. Do you have a checklist of the elements of the story that you're looking for?
Well, we do, I think, but it perhaps is not a written checklist. It's again, being humans, it's sort of an intuitive thing. And Mara said something very interesting. She said, as a responsible entrepreneur, I'm always looking for opportunities to raise money or to pitch, right? And what she means is she's always looking for opportunities to get to that number 10 slide in a 10 slide deck, the ask. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, when they're working their way through their slide deck, are somewhat nervous about how they're going to finally ask investors for money. It's not generally a comfortable thing for most people, especially if you've not been involved in sales. It's not a comfortable thing to ask other people for money. So they sort of view that last slide with trepidation. But really, if you think about it, everybody in the room knows why the entrepreneur is pitching to the investor. That's what you're there for. The investor, if they're hearing a good story, and if the story in the deck is structured so that it keeps their interest, building from one slide to another. In other words, if there's dramatic tension that never lets go, you've got the backstory now, you've got the solution, you've got the reason why this team can get there. By about slide number 4, when you're talking, let's say, secret sauce, what it is that makes your company different, before you get to the details on the technology, before you get to your team, before you get to all that other stuff, by slide number 4, a good entrepreneur has really sold their story. So the investor is waiting for that last slide, the ask. They want to hear what the ask is. They want to know the offer. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs lose sight of that. They might break their storytelling and stumble thinking, oh, I finally got to ask them for money, and I don't know if I'm asking for enough or too little. That's self-defeating. Again, you in our checklist mentally, as we're listening to a pitch, by about slide 4, I want to be sold on the idea, then everything else is validation, and then I want to get to that ask because the entrepreneur, like Mara, has sold me on her story, and now I want to know what she needs to make her dream come true.
Right. One of the mistakes I see in a lot of pitches is the entrepreneur doesn't clearly explain their ask in terms of what they're going to use the money for. And in other cases, they don't know how much they really need. They think it's like asking your parents for raising your allowance. You know, the less you ask, the more likely it is to get funded. But that's not what most investment groups look for. They want to make sure you're asking for the right amount to get you to the next milestones. Mara, I was wondering if you could tell us how you establish milestones in your fundraising strategy, and any tips to the listeners on how to develop a good financial raise strategy.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we have focused primarily on not tying our fundraising to, maybe calendar time or runway, but really tying our fundraising milestones against true value inflection points for the company. So in the life science space, we're relatively lucky in that there's some very, very clear milestones. So maybe it's a first in human clinical trial, maybe it's your FDA approval, something like that. That's what we've used for our milestones. So our seed round was financing against our FDA approval, and then our Series A will be for commercial launch and sales. So we've tried to work against those really significant points where we can see a step change in the value of the company and point to something outside benchmarks that will say, okay, we've gone from being worth whatever it is, just a few $1 million here to $10 million there, and use those as our benchmark points. But, I've gotten so much advice along the way that however much you think it's going to cost more than that. So raise more than you think you need has been a good learning point for me. And, balancing that with making sure the size that you're raising scales appropriately with the market that you're launching into. So you never want to be in a position where you're not going to be able to give your investors a meaningful return. So if you're only entering a relatively small market and say you're expecting sales only on the order of, 10 or $15 million, you can't be raising so much money that you're not going to be able to give them a return off that. So you have to do the whole math, think through your whole story of what your value is along each step of the way, and what your sales revenue is going to be, and kind of where that's going to end, and make sure that you have a pathway for your investors to do well every step of the way with you.
So Mara, have you ever had a bad pitch?
Absolutely.
If so, how did you recover from that?
Yes, I have. I think if you are fundraising and pitching full time, it is just guaranteed to be part of the story that you have some awful pitches. For me, the absolute worst ones that kind of really get me down are when you get your kind of courtesy listen, where maybe somebody introduced you or something like that, and you have somebody who's listening to your pitch, but they do not care. They're not engaged, and they're trying to be nice in making the time and listening to you. For what I think the most demoralizing pitch I ever had was I was trying to tell my story. I had been introduced to this investor by somebody who was well respected, and so I think they were trying to do a favor to the well-respected person by listening, but they weren't interested in life sciences at all. And they didn't just tell me that up front, but the person was outside walking their dog, and all you could hear is wind and like the rustle of their jacket. And it was like they were on FaceTime on their phone. They were paying zero attention. They could hear 1 out of every 3 words, and they did not care about what I was saying. And it was awful. So yes, I think every entrepreneur has some pitches that go sideways, an investor that just doesn't see the picture you're painting. And I think my advice to other entrepreneurs is you got to push through it. Part of this is a numbers game, and it's a little bit like dating. You have to try and connect with a lot of people before you find people that get your vision, get your business model, and really believe in you and want to get behind it. And you don't want to force it with the people who don't see it, who maybe you don't click with and have a good energy, because everyone you're inviting on to be an investor is effectively becoming part of your team and kind of your boss. And you want people that you're going to be excited to check up with, excited to share good news and bad news, because they're going to help coach you through it. So for me, it can take a little while to shake off a bad pitch, but I try to just tell myself that's not somebody I wanted on my team anyway. I want people who see it and see the vision and, just keep trying to get back out there and pitch again, and you'll find those right people.
Great. Scott, any tips on how an entrepreneur can recover from a bad pitch? I'm sure you've seen your share of great pitches and also not so great pitches. How can an entrepreneur recover from a bad pitch?
Well, this may be a little bit of a twist on your question, but I think the best way to recover from a bad pitch is to do everything you can before that pitch to avoid having a bad pitch. In the Navy, I used to say preparation is the battle, right? So you, as a naval aviator, your flight plan in detail, you try to eliminate all the planning risk elements so that what you're left with are really just execution risk things. Some of those you can't control. You're just going to encounter them along the way. I think that an entrepreneur who wants to have a successful pitch will spend time knowing about or studying the investors that they're going to be in front of, right? As Mara said, it's nice to get a referral to somebody, but you want to make sure you're pitching to someone who is interested because their fund or their group funds that type of deal. You want to know what kind of deals they've funded in the past. You want to make your pitch deck structured in a way that after you run through it about 100 times yourself, and then 100 more times with other interested people, you feel it moves pretty smoothly. I'll give my standard advice is I've almost never seen embedded video work well on the day when the entrepreneur is trying to get it to work there in the pitch. It ran well at home, and then they get to the investor's office, they start running it, and oops, slow internet connection or something like this. And that momentum, that storytelling momentum is now broken. You don't want to do that unless you absolutely have to. So make those things in your favor at the outset. And then, of course, rehearse, pitch to everybody. I think that's pretty standard guidance. I would also add just one last thing, Don, to what you said about the reasons for pitching. When I'm looking at a pitch, when I'm listening to an entrepreneur's story, I want to know what they're going to do with that funding. And there are generally two reasons why I think an entrepreneur should be raising money. One is they are raising enough money to get to market. And again, I work in the angel and early stage. So that's a typical expectation. You're going to need that investor's money to get to market. The other reason is they are raising money to get to more money. And that's where, maybe in Mara's case, this was true. You've got a technical milestone or a validation point ahead of your go-to-market point that you need to achieve. And if you get that patent issued, or if you get that technology proved in the lab, it will substantially improve your chances of one day getting to market, but it takes money. You've got to build that lab equipment or get that machine. And so that's a legitimate reason as an investor to receive a pitch, money to get to money. And I want to know in the entrepreneur's mind, as they're pitching, as they're telling their story, whether or not they understand why they're actually raising the money. Are they getting to market? Are they getting to more money? And hopefully they know clearly enough that they can articulate that well to the investor and have a good pitch.
One of the suggestions I would have for all entrepreneurs pitching is to ask for feedback. Bluetree enjoys, I think, a good reputation in the market because we go out of our way to provide feedback to all people who come before our screening committees and pitch to us. Whether they've advanced, they get one of three outcomes. Either they advance in our process into due diligence, or they get what I call the not now message. We think what you're doing is interesting, but we think you're a little bit early, or there's a decline. But we always give feedback on about 7 different points. And I think it's important to ask for feedback. For example, you didn't talk about your exit strategy or things like that. So the next time you pitch, you can make sure you're adding those elements in there. Joe, do we have time for one more question on who pitched?
Yeah, I wanted to just let you guys know that we're up against the clock, but we did have one question that was asked. Maybe we can wrap everything up by answering
Sure.
this. The question from Eric is, the 10-slide pitch standard used to be Guy Kawaski's Art of Start. Is that still applicable?
I'll give my quick answer. The most important thing is not your slides, it's your story. Scott hit it on the head. It's really your narrative is the most important thing. Communicate in clean, simple terms. Don't use unexplained acronyms. Don't get too techy. And even if you have a very complex technology, explain it in simple terms. I'll let Mara and Scott provide their closing comments. Mara, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's referred to Guy Kawasaki's. I think it's an interesting touchstone, but I don't think it's quite the gold standard it used to be. I think it's much better to tailor your story to your own company rather than trying to force your story into that standard template personally. Because as we've been saying, it's about you, it's about your story, it's about how you're going to take whatever amount of money you're getting from your investors and make that multiply, and what reasons can you give them to believe in you that you can actually make that happen. So, I guess my best advice is everybody's going to have an opinion on your pitch. Everyone will have an opinion on your pitch, and it's your job as an entrepreneur to take all of that in. And weight them appropriately. If it's somebody who has no idea about your industry, you can take it, but take it with a grain of salt. But if you're starting to hear consistent feedback by people you respect and admire, maybe it's not them, maybe it's you. Maybe there's an element missing to your storytelling, and really think about that. But I would agree with Don. Don't waste too much time perfecting that pitch deck. It's about the connection, the story, knowing your market inside and out, knowing your facts inside and out, and being prepared, as Scott said, to know their background and make the best presentation you can.
Scott, we'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I think the 10-slide pitch deck that Guy Kawasaki offers is a good template. It's safe, and I don't think, especially in the early stages of a company, I don't think you'd get in trouble if you used it. But you will get in trouble with any pitch deck if you use your slides as a crutch. Don't put up slides and expect the entrepreneur or the investors to sit there and read your slides. They're watching you. They want to hear from you. The slides are just, background. Now, you want some important points on the slides so that they're not blank background. But I would say, again, don't use your slides as a crutch.
Great. Thank you both so much for a great conversation.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Well, I'm always blown away by whenever we have a panelist and they talk about pitches. I, as an investor, always learn something new and get a new perspective. So thank you, Don, Scott, and Mara. Great insight and feedback.